Tommy Briggs watched as Marcus Johnson stepped out of his truck and began unloading boxes with quiet efficiency. Tommy's sneer deepened. Here was exactly the kind of problem that required his clan's special attention. The cross burning on Marcus's property 3 nights later was just a gentle introduction, Tommy's way of explaining how things worked in their corner of Georgia. But what the man couldn't recognize beneath Marcus's calm demeanor was 20 years of Delta Force training, controlled lethality, disguised as civilian respectability. When Tommy's crew surrounded the farmhouse with torches, they thought they were teaching fear to another soft target. But Marcus Johnson was about to show them what real education looked like. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The gravel crunched under Marcus Johnson's boots as he stepped out of his black pickup truck, surveying the 47 acres that now belonged to him. Rolling hills stretched toward a line of ancient oak trees, their branches creating natural boundaries between his property and the neighboring farmland. A 2-story farmhouse sat at the center, its white paint weathered but solid, with a wrap-around porch that faced the morning sun. "This'll do just fine," he murmured, pulling his military duffel bag from the truck bed. 20 years of Delta Force deployments had taught him to appreciate simplicity. 4 walls, a roof, and enough space to breathe without neighbors peering over his shoulder. The drive from Fort Bragg had taken him through small towns that blurred together, but Millbrook felt different when he'd first seen it 3 months ago. Maybe it was the way the Chattahoochee River curved around the valley, or how the mountains rose like protective walls in the distance, or maybe he just needed to believe somewhere could feel like home. Marcus walked the perimeter of his property, noting sight lines and natural cover out of habit. Old training died hard. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road, close enough for emergencies, far enough for privacy. Perfect. An hour later, he drove into town for supplies. Millbrook's Main Street looked like a postcard from 1950. Murphy's Hardware, Daisy's Diner, and the First National Bank lined up like dominoes. American flags hung from every lamppost, and someone had planted flower boxes along the sidewalks. The bell above Murphy's Hardware chimed as Marcus entered. Conversations stopped. 3 men in work clothes turned to stare, their eyes tracking him as he moved toward the tool section. "Help you find something?" The clerk, a thin man with graying hair, kept his voice neutral. "Just browsing, thanks." Marcus selected a hammer, some nails, and a deadbolt lock. Basic security measures. At the counter, the clerk rang up his purchases without meeting his eyes. "You're the fellow bought the Henderson place." "That's right. Been empty 2 years since old Jim passed." The clerk's tone suggested this was somehow significant. "Shame to see it sit vacant." Marcus nodded, paying in cash. Behind him, he heard whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. 47 acres. Paid cash, from what I heard. City money, probably. Atlanta. Maybe Birmingham. Wonder what he plans to do with all that land. The bell chimed again as Marcus left, their stares following him through the window. At Daisy's Diner, he slid into a corner booth with his back to the wall. Another old habit. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, approached with a coffee pot. "Afternoon, honey. I'm Betty Hawthorne. You must be our new neighbor." Her smile seemed genuine, unlike the reception at the hardware store. "Marcus Johnson. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am." "Oh, listen to those manners. Your mama raised you right." Betty poured his coffee, her movements efficient and practiced. "What brings you to our little corner of Georgia?" "Looking for quiet. Seemed like a good place to find it." Betty's expression flickered, something between sympathy and concern. "Well, Millbrook's certainly that. Most of the time." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "People here take time to warm up to newcomers. Don't take it personal." Marcus met her eyes. "I appreciate the advice." Course, once folks get to know you, they're good people. Just set in their ways, you understand? The way she emphasized their ways suggested she meant more than simple small-town conservatism. Marcus nodded anyway. After lunch, he stopped at the post office to forward his mail. The clerk, a nervous young man with acne scars, processed his paperwork with shaking hands. Military forwarding address, the clerk noted, reading Marcus's form. Thank you for your service. Just doing my job. 20 years, says here. That's impressive. Marcus signed the final form, ready to try civilian life. Driving home, he noticed a pickup truck following at a distance. When he turned onto his gravel driveway, the truck continued past, but slowly enough for him to glimpse two men inside. The passenger held a cell phone to his ear. That evening, Marcus stood on his front porch watching the sun set behind the oak trees. Crickets chirped in the gathering darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The peace he'd been seeking felt within reach. From the tree line, a camera lens caught the dying light as it focused on his silhouette. Marcus remained unaware, lost in thoughts of the quiet life he planned to build, while in the shadows, other plans were already taking shape. Marcus established his routine within the first week. Dawn workouts in his backyard, followed by property maintenance and trips to town for supplies. He kept interactions brief but polite, nodding to neighbors who bothered to acknowledge him. Most didn't. The farmhouse needed work. Loose boards on the porch, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, windows that stuck from years of humidity. Marcus welcomed the physical labor. It kept his hands busy, and his mind focused on something besides the weight of civilian life. On Thursday morning, he was replacing rotted porch planks when Deputy Jake Morrison's patrol car pulled into his driveway. The young officer stepped out, adjusting his duty belt nervously. "Morning, Mr. Johnson. I'm Deputy Morrison. Just wanted to introduce myself. Make sure you're settling in okay." Marcus set down his hammer. "Appreciate you stopping by, Deputy." "Everything's fine." "Good, good." Morrison glanced around the property, taking in the neat stacks of lumber and tools. "Doing some renovations?" "Place needs some work. Nothing major." Morrison kicked at the gravel with his boot. "Look, Mr. Johnson, I know folks here can seem standoffish at first. It's nothing personal. Just takes time for people to get comfortable with change." The careful way he chose his words suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "I understand, Deputy. I'm not looking for trouble." "I'm sure you're not. Just, if anything does come up, anything at all, you call me directly." Morrison handed him a business card with his personal cell number written on the back. Day or night. After the deputy left, Marcus studied the card. In his experience, when law enforcement preemptively offered help, it meant they expected you'd need it. That same evening, 8 miles across town, Tommy Briggs slammed his beer bottle on the scarred wooden table. The abandoned barn that served as their meeting place reeked of old hay and motor oil, lit by camping lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. 47 acres, Tommy spat. Right in the heart of our county. And nobody thought to tell me about it until after the deed was signed. "Tommy, calm down," said Ray Peters, a rail-thin man with yellowed teeth. "Maybe he's just passing through. Lot of folks buy property and never do nothing with it. You see his truck? His clothes? This ain't some weekend warrior playing farmer." Tommy's voice rose with each word. "This is somebody with money. Somebody with plans." Frank Miller shifted uncomfortably on his folding chair. At 52, the bank president looked out of place among the others in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. "I'm sure we're getting worked up over nothing. One man can't change. One man can change everything." Tommy's fist hit the table again. "That's how it starts. First one, then his family, then his friends. Before you know it, we got a whole different kind of neighborhood." "What you suggesting we do about it?" asked Carl Dixon, a mechanic who worked at the Ford dealership. His hands were still stained black despite scrubbing. Tommy stood, pacing the length of the barn. "I'm suggesting we make our position clear. Let him know he ain't welcome. Give him a chance to reconsider his investment." Frank cleared his throat. "Tommy, we need to be careful. We can't afford attention from outside authorities. My position at the bank, your position at the bank is exactly why we can afford to take action." Tommy's eyes glittered in the lantern light. "You think I don't know where our funding comes from? You want to keep playing dress-up in your fancy office, pretending you ain't one of us?" Frank's face reddened. "I've supported this organization for 15 years. Don't question my commitment. Then prove it. We need to send a message before this Johnson fellow gets too comfortable." Ray Peters leaned forward. "What kind of message?" Tommy smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face into something predatory. "The kind that's been effective for generations. Start small. Let him know he's being watched. Then escalate until he gets the picture." "And if he doesn't get the picture?" Carl asked. "Then we make it clearer." Frank stood abruptly. "I need to get home. My wife's expecting me." "Course she is," Tommy said. "You go on back to your comfortable life, Frank. Just remember, that comfort depends on keeping certain kinds of people in their place." After Frank left, the remaining men huddled closer. Tommy outlined his plan in hushed tones, their voices mixing with the night sounds outside the barn. Owls hooted in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley. None of them noticed the slight figure watching from behind the grain silo. Betty Hawthorne, who'd come looking for her escaped cat, and found something much more troubling. The next morning, Marcus discovered the first sign. A wooden cross, barely 2 feet tall, had been planted in his front yard overnight. It hadn't been burned, but the message was clear enough. He pulled it from the ground and examined the construction. Amateur, but deliberate. Someone wanted him to know he was being watched. Marcus carried the cross to his workshop and set it on the workbench. 20 years of military service had taught him to recognize escalation patterns. This was step 1 in someone's playbook. He opened his laptop and began typing notes in a secure document. Date, time, description of incident, potential suspects based on yesterday's observations in town. Old habits from intelligence gathering in hostile territories. Document everything. Trust nothing to memory. Prepare for what comes next. Outside, a pickup truck drove slowly past his driveway for the 3rd time that morning. Marcus noted the license plate and added it to his file. The game had begun, though his opponents didn't yet realize they were playing against someone who'd spent 2 decades mastering it. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated with methodical precision. Marcus's mailbox was knocked over twice, requiring him to reset it in concrete. His truck tires were slashed while he shopped for groceries, forcing him to call a tow truck and endure the knowing looks of townspeople who gathered to watch. The phone calls started on a Tuesday. Heavy breathing, racial slurs, and threats delivered in disguised voices at all hours. Marcus documented each incident with military precision, but he didn't report them. Deputy Morrison drove by more frequently, slowing as he passed the property, his expression troubled. On Friday afternoon, Marcus needed supplies from Murphy's Hardware, replacement hinges for his front door, and a new deadbolt. The same thin clerk from his first visit rang up his purchases with nervous efficiency. "Having security issues?" the clerk asked, eyeing the heavy-duty lock. "Just being cautious." As Marcus headed for the door, a heavy-set man in work clothes blocked his path. The man's face was flushed red, whether from anger or alcohol wasn't clear. "You're the one bought the Henderson place," the man said. It wasn't a question. "That's right." Marcus kept his voice neutral, recognizing the confrontational stance. "Tommy Briggs." The man didn't extend his hand. Been hearing a lot about you around town. All good things, I hope. Tommy's laugh was harsh. Depends on your perspective. See, some folks think you made a mistake coming here. Think maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. I'm plenty happy where I am. Are you now? Tommy stepped closer, and Marcus caught the smell of beer and tobacco. Funny thing about happiness. It can disappear real quick when you ain't where you belong. The hardware store had gone quiet. Other customers pretended to browse while straining to listen. The clerk had stopped pretending to work entirely. Where exactly do you think I belong? Marcus asked. Atlanta, Birmingham, Detroit, plenty of places more, suitable for your kind. Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before violence, blood pressure dropping, vision sharpening, time slowing. My kind? Don't play stupid. You know exactly what I mean. Tommy's voice rose. This is a decent community. Family community. We don't need outside elements coming in, changing things, bringing their problems with them. What problems would those be? Crime, drugs, the kind of trouble that follows certain people wherever they go. Tommy was almost shouting now. This ain't the inner city. This is our home, and we protect what's ours. Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I'm a retired military veteran who paid cash for my property and minds his own business. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with me. Tommy's face darkened. You think that uniform gives you some kind of special privilege? Think it makes you better than us? I think it makes me someone who fought for the right of every American to live where they choose. Pretty words. Tommy's hand moved toward his belt, where Marcus glimpsed the handle of a large knife. But words don't change reality. And the reality is, you ain't welcome here. The tension stretched taut between them. Marcus calculated angles and distances, noting the positions of other customers and exits. 20 years of combat experience had taught him to end fights quickly when they were unavoidable. But this wasn't a battlefield, and civilian consequences were different. Marcus stepped back. I appreciate you making your position clear, he said calmly. Now you know mine. I'm staying. Tommy's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. Marcus walked past him toward the door. Yes. We will. That evening, Marcus called his sister Rose in Atlanta. Her voice immediately brightened when she heard his. Marcus, I was wondering when you'd check in. How's the new place? It's complicated. He sat on his porch, watching the sun set behind the oak trees. Had an interesting conversation in town today. What kind of interesting? Marcus hesitated. Rose had always been able to read him, even over the phone. The kind that reminds you not everyone's happy about change. Marcus, her voice grew sharp with concern. Are you in some kind of trouble? Nothing I can't handle. That's not what I asked. Are you safe? I'm fine, Rose. Just feeling my way through small-town politics. Small-town politics don't usually make you sound like you're planning a military operation. She paused. You know you can come stay with me in Atlanta. My guest room's always open. I'm not running from this. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to be smart. If people are threatening you, nobody's threatening me. Marcus. Okay, somebody might have suggested I'd be happier elsewhere. But that's their problem, not mine. Rose was quiet for a long moment. Promise me something. If this gets worse, if you feel like you're in real danger, you'll call me. Don't try to handle everything alone like you always do. I promise. After they hung up, Marcus made his evening security check. Door locks, window latches, clear sight lines from every room. He pulled his service pistol from its locked case and performed a function check, muscle memory guiding his movements. At 10:30, he was reviewing property surveys on his laptop when he heard gravel crunching in his driveway. Multiple vehicles, engines running low. Marcus killed the lights and moved to the front window. Through the curtains, He counted 6 trucks positioned to block his driveway. Dark shapes moved between them, men carrying torches that cast dancing shadows across his property. They'd positioned themselves to cut off vehicle escape routes while leaving the house surrounded. Professional work. Someone had planned this. Marcus grabbed his pistol and moved to the back of the house, intending to slip out through the kitchen door and circle around behind them. But as he reached for the handle, torchlight flickered outside the back windows too. They'd surrounded the house completely. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No way out. Time to talk. Marcus moved back to the living room, staying low and away from windows. Through the front curtains, he watched 8 men advance toward his house in formation, torches held high. Tommy Briggs led the group, his face twisted with satisfaction in the firelight. They reached his porch and spread out along the front of the house. Tommy gestured to 2 men, who moved toward the sides of the building. Another signal sent someone to watch the back. Then they waited. Marcus realized their strategy: force him to come to them or break down his door. Either way, they controlled the engagement. He considered his options: barricade inside and call for help that might not come, or try to fight his way out against overwhelming odds. Before he could decide, the front window exploded inward as someone hurled a rock wrapped in paper. Glass scattered across his living room floor. "Johnson!" Tommy's voice carried clearly through the broken window. "Time for that conversation!" Marcus stayed low, pistol ready, as more rocks shattered his side windows. They weren't trying to break in. They were flushing him out. "Come on out, boy! Let's settle this like men!" The kitchen window exploded next, followed by his bedroom windows. Glass crunched under boots as men positioned themselves at each opening, torches providing light while staying back far enough to avoid return fire. Marcus realized he'd been outmaneuvered. They'd turned his house into a trap, with him inside and them controlling every exit. Professional tactics from people who clearly weren't professionals. Someone had planned this very carefully. A Molotov cocktail sailed through the broken front window, splashing fire across his living room floor. Then another through the kitchen window. Smoke began filling the house immediately. Marcus had seconds to choose: burn alive inside or face 8 armed men outside. He kicked open the front door and rolled onto the porch, weapon ready. But they were waiting. 3 men rushed him simultaneously, while the others provided light and backup. Marcus managed to drop one with a precise shot, and wound another before a tire iron connected with his wrist, sending his pistol spinning into the darkness. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. 8 against 1, with clubs and chains, was mathematics no amount of training could overcome. Marcus went down swinging, taking 2 more with him, but the outcome was inevitable. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Tommy Briggs standing over him with a bloody tire iron, his house burning behind them. "Welcome to Millbrook," Tommy said, and brought the iron down again. Marcus drifted back to consciousness slowly, his body cataloging injuries with clinical precision. Broken ribs on his left side, possible concussion, deep cuts along his scalp where the tire iron had connected. His right shoulder felt dislocated, and dried blood crusted his lips and nose. But he was alive. The realization came with a flood of tactical awareness. He was chained to a support beam in what looked like an abandoned barn. Heavy shackles around his wrists, connected to a rusted chain that allowed minimal movement. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating dust motes and old farm equipment. Voices carried from outside, angry, agitated conversations punctuated by the clink of beer bottles. "Should have finished it at his house," someone was saying. Carl Dixon, the mechanic. "Tommy wanted him to suffer first," came Ray Peters' nasal reply. "Make an example." "Well, where the hell is Tommy? Been 2 hours since he went to get Frank." Marcus tested his restraints carefully. keeping his movements minimal. The chains were old but solid, the beam behind him thick and deeply rooted. His captors had secured him properly. These weren't amateurs playing at intimidation anymore. The barn door creaked open, and Tommy Briggs entered with Frank Miller in tow. Frank looked pale and shaken, his banker's composure completely shattered. "Jesus Christ, Tommy. This has gone too far," Frank whispered, staring at Marcus with horror. "We're talking about kidnapping now. Federal charges. We're talking about sending a message that needed sending 20 years ago," Tommy snapped. "You want to back out now, after your money bought the gasoline that burned his house? I never agreed to this. To torture." Tommy backhanded Frank across the face, the sound echoing in the barn. "You agreed the moment you wrote the first check. You think you can play dress-up in your fancy bank, pretending you ain't part of this? You're in it now, whether you like it or not." Marcus watched Frank crumble, saw the exact moment the banker realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The transformation from reluctant supporter to active participant. He'd seen it before in combat zones. Fear made men do things they never thought possible. "Look who's awake," Tommy said, noticing Marcus's open eyes. "Good. I was worried we'd hit you too hard." "Not hard enough, apparently," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the pain. Tommy laughed. "Still got fight in you. I like that. Makes this more interesting. What exactly is this?" "Education." Tommy pulled a folding chair closer and sat down facing Marcus. "See, you came to our town thinking you could just take what you wanted. Our land, our way of life, but everything has a price. I paid the asking price, in cash. Money ain't the only currency that matters." Tommy leaned forward. "Some things got to be earned. Respect, belonging, the right to call a place home." Marcus tested the chains again, subtly checking for weak points. The beam behind him was solid oak, probably a century old. The shackles were modern, heavy-duty restraints that someone had acquired specifically for this purpose. "So, what's the lesson?" Marcus asked. "Simple. You leave Millbrook tonight, never come back, and we let you drive away. Stay. And—" Tommy gestured around the barn. "Well, accidents happen, especially to outsiders who don't know the local hazards. And if I agree to leave, then you sign over the deed to your property. Frank here will handle the paperwork, and we give you a 10-minute head start before we call it in as a home invasion gone wrong. Your body burned up in the fire. Real tragedy." Frank made a choking sound. "Tommy, you can't be serious. This is murder. This is survival." Tommy's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think this stops with one man? You think if we let him stay, others won't follow? In 5 years, our children won't recognize their own hometown." Marcus watched the dynamics between them, noting how fear and guilt warped their decision-making. Frank was the weak link, a man who'd funded extremism from the safety of his office, but couldn't stomach the reality of violence. Tommy was the true believer, convinced his cause justified any action. "What's it gonna be, Johnson?" Tommy asked. "Easy way or hard way?" "I need time to think." Tommy's laugh was harsh. "Time's up. Frank, get those papers ready." As Frank fumbled with a briefcase, his hands shaking, Marcus made his move. 20 years of escape and evasion training had taught him that restraints were only as strong as their weakest component, and that component was usually human error. The shackles were properly secured, but the chain had been threaded through an old eye bolt in the beam. The bolt was rusty, its threads weakened by decades of moisture. Marcus had been working it loose during the conversation, using micro-movements to stress the connection point. When Tommy turned to supervise Frank's paperwork, Marcus threw his full body weight against the chain. The eye bolt tore free from the rotten wood with a sharp crack, sending him stumbling forward with 6 feet of heavy chain still attached to his wrists. "He's loose!" Ray Peters shouted from the doorway. Marcus swung the chain like a flail, catching Carl Dixon across the chest and dropping him instantly. Tommy lunged with a knife, but Marcus trapped his arm and drove a knee into his solar plexus, doubling him over. Frank screamed and ran for the door, but Ray Peters was already there with a shotgun. "Nobody moves!" Marcus froze, the chain heavy in his hands, Tommy gasping at his feet. 4 against 1, and they still had weapons. But now he wasn't chained to a beam, and the odds had improved dramatically. "Drop the chain," Ray ordered, his voice shaking. "Sure." Marcus smiled coldly. "But you should know something first." "What?" "I'm not some random victim you can intimidate." Marcus's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "I'm a Delta Force operator, with 20 years of experience hunting people exactly like you. And now I know who you are, where you live, and what you're capable of." The barn went silent, except for Tommy's labored breathing. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "I'm walking out of here tonight, and then I'm going to show you what a real education looks like." Ray's finger tightened on the trigger, but hesitation cost him the advantage. Marcus was already moving, using Tommy as a human shield while closing the distance. The shotgun blast went wide, tearing chunks from the barn wall as Marcus drove his chain-wrapped fist into Ray's temple. The fight lasted 30 seconds. When it ended, 4 men lay unconscious in the dirt, and Marcus stood alone in the moonlight, still wearing shackles, but no longer anyone's prisoner. He picked up Ray's shotgun and Frank's briefcase, then walked into the night. Behind him, the barn held the evidence of their conspiracy, and 4 men who had no idea what they'd unleashed. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real education was about to begin. Marcus spent the first hour after his escape removing the shackles with tools stolen from the barn's workshop. His military training had included escape and evasion techniques, but more importantly, it had taught him patience. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. By dawn, he'd established a temporary base in an abandoned hunting cabin 3 miles from his burned property. The cabin sat on state land, invisible from any road, with clear sight lines in all directions. He'd found it during his initial property surveys. Always know your terrain, another lesson from Delta Force. First priority was intelligence gathering. Marcus opened Frank Miller's briefcase and spread the contents across the cabin's rickety table. Bank statements, property deeds, and most importantly, a membership roster for something called the Millbrook Heritage Society. 12 names with addresses, phone numbers, and what appeared to be financial contributions. Tommy Briggs lived on Elm Street in a double-wide trailer. Ray Peters had an apartment above his auto parts store. Carl Dixon owned a small house on the outskirts of town. Each name came with a complete dossier Frank had apparently compiled for insurance purposes: real names, employment history, family members, criminal records. Marcus photographed every document with his phone, then uploaded the files to an encrypted cloud server he'd maintained since leaving the military. Old habits from intelligence work. Always have backup copies. Always assume your primary location could be compromised. Next came reconnaissance. Marcus spent 2 days conducting surveillance on each target, moving through Millbrook like a ghost. 20 years of operating in hostile territory had taught him how to become invisible, how to dress like a local, how to move without drawing attention, how to observe without being observed. Tommy Briggs followed a predictable routine. Morning beer run to the gas station, afternoons at Ray's auto parts store, evenings at Murphy's bar. He lived alone, no family visible, and his trailer sat on an isolated lot with minimal security. Ray Peters opened his store at 8 every morning and closed at 6. He lived upstairs, alone, except for weekend visits from his ex-wife's children. The building was old, with poor locks and multiple access points. Carl Dixon worked irregular hours at the Ford dealership, but spent most evenings at home with his wife and teenage daughter. His house had a security system. Marcus noted the company stickers on the windows, but the installation looked amateur. Meanwhile, across town, Tommy Briggs was discovering that his problems had multiplied overnight. He sat in Ray's auto parts store, nursing a beer and a splitting headache, while the other surviving members of their group tried to process what had happened. "He's military," Carl said for the 5th time, ice pack pressed against his bruised ribs. "Real military, not weekend warrior stuff." "We knew that already," Tommy snapped. "Don't make him Superman." "Superman don't break out of chains and drop 4 armed men in 30 seconds, Ray muttered, his left eye swollen shut. Frank Miller hadn't spoken since they'd regrouped that morning. He sat hunched in a corner chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "Frank," Tommy's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You still with us?" Frank looked up slowly. "My briefcase is gone. Everything was in there. Names, addresses, financial records. So what? Ain't nothing illegal about a heritage society. The bank records show payments to you, Tommy. Payments for activities. If those get to the wrong people, they won't." Tommy stood up, pacing the cramped office. "Because we're gonna find this Johnson character and finish what we started." "Find him where?" Carl demanded. "His house burned down. His trucks impounded. Far as anyone knows, he's dead or gone." "He ain't dead, and he ain't gone. He's still here, somewhere, planning God knows what." Tommy's paranoia was growing by the hour. Probably watching us right now. The men instinctively glanced toward the windows, but the afternoon sun turned the glass into mirrors, showing only their own worried faces. "Maybe we should call this off," Ray suggested. "Cut our losses. Lay low for a while." Tommy whirled on him. "Call it off? You think he's gonna call it off? You think he's gonna forget what happened and move on with his life? What's he gonna do? He's one man with military training and a grudge." Tommy's voice rose. "One man who knows who we are and where we live. One man who just proved he can get out of any trap we set." Frank finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "We should have left him alone." Tommy backhanded him across the mouth. "Too late for should-haves. We're in this now, all of us. Either we finish it, or he finishes us." That evening, Marcus put his plan into motion. His first target was Ray Peters, who lived above his auto parts store in what amounted to a furnished apartment. The building was old brick, with a fire escape that hadn't been maintained in decades. Marcus waited until midnight, then climbed to the second-floor window. The lock was a joke. A simple latch he opened with a credit card. Ray slept in the front bedroom, snoring loudly enough to mask any sounds. Marcus moved through the apartment like a shadow, photographing everything: personal documents, computer files, hidden cash, and a collection of racist memorabilia that filled an entire closet. But more importantly, he found Ray's address book, handwritten names and phone numbers that included contacts outside Millbrook. This wasn't just a local hate group. They had connections. Marcus planted 3 listening devices in strategic locations, then left as silently as he'd arrived. Ray never stirred. The next night, he hit Carl Dixon's house. The security system was even easier to bypass than Marcus had expected. A basic setup with obvious blind spots and predictable wiring. Carl's home office contained a treasure trove of information: correspondence with other supremacist groups, weapons purchase receipts, and photographs from rallies across the Southeast. Marcus copied everything to portable drives, then planted surveillance equipment throughout the house. Carl's wife and daughter were innocent. Their bedrooms remained untouched. But Carl himself had just become an open book. Tommy Briggs would be more challenging. His trailer sat on an isolated lot with clear sight lines in all directions, and Tommy was paranoid enough to vary his routine. Marcus spent 3 nights studying the location before making his move. When he finally entered the trailer, he found a virtual armory: assault rifles, ammunition, homemade explosives, and detailed plans for attacks on what Tommy called integration targets: black families, liberal churches, Jewish businesses. The scope of their ambitions was far broader than Marcus had realized. But the most valuable discovery was Tommy's communications with Frank Miller. Text messages and emails revealing the full extent of the bank president's involvement, including financial transfers that violated multiple federal banking laws. Marcus photographed everything, planted his devices, and added one personal touch: a single surveillance photo of Tommy sleeping, placed on his nightstand where he'd see it first thing in the morning. The message was clear: I can reach you anywhere, anytime. By week's end, Marcus had transformed from victim to predator. 4 listening devices fed him real-time intelligence about his enemy's movements, fears, and plans. Hidden cameras provided visual confirmation of their activities. And most importantly, he had enough documented evidence to destroy them through legal channels. But Marcus wasn't interested in legal channels right now. They'd crossed a line when they burned his house and chained him in that barn. Now he was going to teach them what real fear felt like. The education was just beginning. Marcus executed his plan in one decisive night. While the Heritage Society members slept, he systematically dismantled their entire operation. Ray Peters's weapons cache disappeared from his basement, every rifle, handgun, and box of ammunition vanishing without a trace. Carl Dixon's truck was stripped to its frame in his own driveway, valuable parts removed with surgical precision. Tommy's trailer was cleaned out of anything remotely illegal, leaving behind only photographic evidence of what had been there. But the real devastation came at Frank Miller's bank. Using access codes Marcus had obtained during his reconnaissance, he downloaded 5 years of financial records, transaction logs, and private communications that documented every illegal funding transfer to Tommy's group. By dawn, Marcus had enough evidence to destroy all 4 men through legal channels. More importantly, he'd crippled their operational capability in a single stroke. The first panicked phone call came at 6 a.m. "Tommy, they're gone!" Ray's voice cracked through the phone. "Every weapon, every round of ammunition, cleaned out completely." "What do you mean, cleaned out?" "I mean professional. No broken locks, no alarms, nothing disturbed except the guns. It's like they never existed." Tommy felt his stomach drop. "Check your truck." "My truck's fine. It's in the—" Ray paused, then let out a strangled cry. "Oh, God! Oh, no! Carl's truck! Look outside!" Tommy peered through his trailer window at Carl Dixon's house across the lot. Where Carl's pickup had been parked sat a bare chassis, stripped of engine, transmission, wheels, even the seats. The shell looked like a mechanical skeleton bleached clean by scavengers. "He hit all of us," Tommy whispered. "Same night, same operation." By noon, the full scope of their losses became clear. Frank Miller had discovered the banking breach and was hyperventilating in his office, staring at computer logs that showed massive data transfers he hadn't authorized. 5 years of records, Frank gasped into his phone. Transaction histories, personal communications, everything. He got it all. "How?" Tommy demanded. "I don't know how. The logs show it came from my terminal, during business hours, but I was in meetings. It's impossible." Tommy's paranoia crystallized into rage. "Nothing's impossible for this guy. We've been playing defense while he runs circles around us. Tommy, if this information gets to federal authorities, then we're all dead men. Prison at minimum. Probably federal charges for domestic terrorism." Tommy's voice turned deadly calm. "Which means we got nothing left to lose." Carl Dixon arrived at Tommy's trailer 20 minutes later, his face pale with shock. "My neighbor's asking questions about the truck. Says he heard machinery running around 3 a.m. but figured it was road construction." "Road construction that strips a vehicle to its frame?" Ray laughed bitterly. "This Johnson character's got military training, professional equipment, and he's making us look like amateurs." "Because we are amateurs," Frank said, appearing in the doorway. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his banker's composure completely shattered. "We're shopkeepers and mechanics playing soldier games against someone who actually was a soldier." Tommy backhanded Frank across the mouth. "Shut up! Just shut up!" "No, I won't shut up!" Frank wiped blood from his lip. "This has gone beyond anything I signed up for, beyond anything rational. We need to cut our losses and what? Run? Hide? Hope he doesn't turn over that evidence to the FBI?" Tommy's voice rose to a shout. "You think he's just gonna forget what we did? Move on with his life?" The trailer fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Ray finally spoke. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop reacting and start acting. Stop letting him dictate the terms." Tommy pulled out a detailed map of the county. "He's got to be somewhere local. Can't have gone far without transportation. And he's been too active to be operating from outside the area." "You want to hunt him?" Carl's voice carried a note of hysteria. "Hunt a Delta Force operator? That's suicide." "Maybe. But it's better than waiting for the FBI to kick down our doors." Tommy spread the map on his kitchen table. "He burned his house, his truck's impounded. So where's he staying? Motel? Rental property? Camping somewhere?" Frank shook his head. "This is insane. We should be hiring lawyers, not planning some kind of military operation. With what money? You think your bank's going to keep employing you once this hits the news? You think any of us are going to have normal lives after this?" The reality of their situation settled over them like a shroud. Their leader was right. There was no going back, no returning to their previous lives. Marcus Johnson had systematically destroyed their organization, their security, and their futures in a single night. "So what's the plan?" Ray asked quietly. Tommy traced roads on the map with his finger. "We know his patterns. He's been watching us, which means he's got to be within surveillance range, probably using the state forest for cover. Plenty of abandoned hunting cabins up there. And when we find him?" Tommy's smile was cold and final. "Then we finish what we started in that barn. Except this time, we don't take prisoners." Carl swallowed hard. "Tommy, if we do this, if we actually kill him, we're already murderers in the eyes of the law. Kidnapping, assault, arson. We crossed that line days ago." Tommy folded the map. "Only question now is whether we go down fighting or go down begging." The four men looked at each other, seeing their own desperation reflected in familiar faces. They'd backed themselves into a corner where violence seemed like the only option left. It was exactly what Marcus had wanted them to think. Dawn broke over Millbrook with an ominous quiet that belied the storm gathering in the shadows. Tommy Briggs stood in the center of what had once been a peaceful town, now transformed into a staging ground for the largest gathering of armed extremists the region had seen in decades. 37 men from 4 states had answered his call, turning the abandoned grain warehouse on the outskirts of town into a makeshift command center. "Listen up!" Tommy's voice carried across the assembled crowd. "This ain't just about one man anymore. This is about sending a message that we don't bow down to federal intimidation." The men nodded, a mixture of local chapter members, militia fighters, and independent operators who'd driven through the night to be here. They carried an arsenal that would make most military units envious: assault rifles, tactical gear, night vision equipment, and enough ammunition for a sustained campaign. Carl Dixon stood at the edge of the group, his face pale with the realization of what he'd helped set in motion. Tommy, my daughter's school is only 2 miles from here. If this turns into a shooting war, then maybe you should have thought about that before you helped fund this operation, Tommy snapped. Too late for second thoughts now. But Carl's concern was spreading through the local members. Ray Peters pulled Tommy aside, his voice urgent. Half these guys I never seen before. Some of them look like they're hoping for a fight with anybody. Police, federal agents, doesn't matter. Good. We need men with backbone. Tommy, that ain't backbone. That's crazy. Ray gestured toward a group of men from Alabama who were discussing explosives with disturbing enthusiasm. They're talking about taking out bridges, cutting communication lines. This ain't about Johnson anymore. They want to turn Millbrook into some kind of battlefield. Tommy's jaw tightened. Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe it's time to stop hiding behind respectability and take a real stand. Against what? One retired soldier who embarrassed us? Ray's voice rose. You're gonna get people killed, Tommy. Innocent people. Innocent people are already under attack. Every day, our way of life gets chipped away by federal overreach, by outsiders coming in and changing our communities. Tommy's voice carried the fervor of a true believer. This Johnson character is just the tip of the spear. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in the state forest, Marcus completed his final preparations. He'd spent the night establishing a defensive network that would channel the coming assault exactly where he wanted it. Motion sensors covered every approach route. Improvised explosive devices, non-lethal but disorienting, were positioned at key choke points. 3 separate fallback positions offered overlapping fields of fire and cached supplies. Most importantly, he'd established communication with federal authorities who were racing toward Millbrook with tactical teams and negotiators. His satellite phone buzzed. Agent Chen's voice was tense. Mr. Johnson, we have eyes on the warehouse. 30-plus armed individuals. Multiple out-of-state vehicles. This has escalated beyond anything we anticipated. How long until your teams arrive? 2 hours. Can you maintain your position? Marcus studied the terrain through his binoculars. I can do better than that. I can ensure this happens away from civilian areas. Mr. Johnson, I need you to understand something. Some of these individuals have federal warrants. Others are known domestic terrorists. If shooting starts, it's going to be a significant engagement. All the more reason to control where it happens. Marcus checked his weapons one final time. Agent Chen, whatever happens, make sure you get the evidence I uploaded, financial records, communications, weapons caches, everything you need to prosecute the entire network. Mr. Johnson, and make sure Deputy Morrison knows he was right to be concerned. He's one of the good ones. Marcus ended the call and settled into his primary position. Below him, he could see the first scout teams moving into the forest, following tracks he'd deliberately left for them to find. Back at the warehouse, the operation was beginning to fracture along predictable lines. Frank Miller had finally arrived, but only to beg Tommy to call everything off. The bank received federal investigators this morning, Frank said, his voice shaking. They have everything, Tommy. Every transaction, every communication. It's over. Nothing's over until we say it's over. Tommy grabbed Frank by the shirt. You started this when you wrote the first check. You don't get to walk away now. I never agreed to this, to armed confrontation with federal agents. Frank's composure finally cracked completely. People are going to die, Tommy. Probably us. Then we die fighting instead of rotting in federal prison. Tommy shoved Frank away. You want to run? Go ahead. But you'll be running for the rest of your life. Frank looked around the warehouse at the assembled men, faces hard with ideology and the anticipation of violence. Some were local, neighbors he'd known for years. Others were strangers who'd driven hundreds of miles for the chance to fight what they saw as government tyranny. "This isn't what we started," Frank whispered. "This is exactly what we started," Tommy replied. "We just didn't have the courage to admit it." Carl Dixon overheard the exchange and felt something break inside him. His daughter Sarah would be getting out of school in 6 hours. His wife Mary was at work at the grocery store, completely unaware that their quiet town had become a powder keg. "I'm out," Carl announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "My family doesn't deserve this." Several of the local men looked uncomfortable, but the out-of-state fighters just laughed. "Family man's getting cold feet," called out someone from the Tennessee group. "Maybe he should stay home with the women and children." Carl's face flushed red, but he held his ground. "My daughter matters more than your cause." "Your daughter's gonna grow up in a country you won't recognize if we don't take a stand now," Tommy said. "But go ahead. Run home. Hide behind your family while other men do what needs doing." The psychological pressure was working exactly as Tommy intended. Shame and peer pressure had kept these men in line for years, and he wasn't about to let them desert now when everything was on the line. But cracks were forming in the foundation of his command. Local men were having second thoughts, while outside agitators pushed for maximum violence. The coalition was unstable, held together only by momentum and Tommy's force of personality. Marcus watched through his scopes as the first teams entered the forest. They moved with reasonable tactical discipline, but they were operating in unfamiliar terrain against an opponent who'd spent days preparing the battlefield. The education was about to reach its final lesson. The assault began at dawn with Tommy's voice crackling over borrowed military radios. "All teams, this is command. Target is located somewhere in grid section Alpha 7. We sweep north to south. No gaps, no mercy." Marcus watched through his scope as 37 armed men spread across the forest in a loose skirmish line. They moved with surprising discipline for civilians, but they were entering terrain he'd spent days preparing. Motion sensors fed him real-time data on their positions, while hidden cameras showed him their faces. Some determined, others clearly nervous about what they'd signed up for. The first explosion came 20 minutes into their advance. A triggered charge sent dirt and debris skyward, more sound than fury, but enough to scatter the eastern flank and announce that their prey wasn't running. "Contact front," someone screamed over the radio. "IED detonation. No casualties, but we're taking fire." Marcus wasn't shooting yet. That was just panicked imagination. But panic was exactly what he wanted. Let them waste ammunition on shadows while he controlled the tempo. Tommy's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Calm down. It's one man with some homemade bombs. Stay in formation and keep moving." But formation was already breaking down as teams sought cover from an enemy they couldn't see. The Alabama group pushed too far ahead, eager for contact, while the local men hung back, suddenly aware this wasn't the simple manhunt they'd imagined. Marcus triggered his second charge as the lead team passed through a natural choke point between two ridges. This time he added muzzle flashes from remote devices, creating the illusion of multiple shooters in elevated positions. "Multiple contacts, high ground east and west." The radio exploded with overlapping reports. "We're caught in a crossfire." "Negative! Negative!" Tommy's voice carried strain now. "Maintain discipline. He's using tricks to make you think there's more of them." But his men were already diving for cover, returning fire at empty positions, while Marcus watched from 600 yards away through his rifle scope. He had a clear shot at Tommy, could end this with one squeeze of the trigger. But that would make him a murderer instead of a defender. And these men needed to face justice in a courtroom, not a grave. Marcus keyed his own radio, broadcasting on their frequency. "This is Marcus Johnson. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and in way over your heads. Last chance to surrender." The response was immediate and predictable, a storm of gunfire directed at nothing. Marcus smiled grimly. They'd just revealed their positions and wasted ammunition on empty forest. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse command post, Frank Miller monitored the radio traffic with growing horror. What had started as a simple manhunt was degenerating into a running firefight with a trained operator who seemed to be everywhere at once. "Tommy, call them back," Frank pleaded into his radio. "This is madness. He's picking them apart." "Shut up, Frank. We got him pinned down." "Pinned down? He's running circles around them." "Listen to your own radio traffic." Carl Dixon stood beside Frank, his face pale as he heard his neighbors and friends shouting panicked reports over the airwaves. "Ray's team is scattered. The Alabama boys are lost. And that's just the first 20 minutes. They'll regroup," Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Will they? Or will they just keep charging into traps until somebody gets killed?" The question hung in the air as another explosion echoed across the forest, followed by more confused radio chatter about multiple contacts and sophisticated defensive positions. Deep in the woods, Marcus executed his fighting withdrawal exactly as planned. The assault teams were spread thin, confused, and increasingly desperate to make contact with an enemy who refused to stand and fight. He triggered his third charge as the Tennessee group tried to flank his supposed position, then moved to his second prepared fighting position, 500 yards to the north. The motion sensors showed him the enemy's attempts at coordination, but their unfamiliarity with the terrain was working against them. "He's moving north!" Tommy's voice carried new urgency. "Teams 4 and 5, intercept. Don't let him reach the logging road." Marcus smiled. The logging road was exactly where he wanted them. A kill zone he'd prepared with overlapping fields of fire and no cover. But first, he needed to draw them in completely. He fired 3 aimed shots at the pursuing teams, not to hit, but to herd them toward the ambush site. The bullets cracked past close enough to send men diving for cover and screaming coordinates into their radios. "Contact north! He's running for the road! All teams converge on grid Alpha 9. We got him trapped." Marcus watched through his scope as teams abandoned their careful search pattern and rushed toward the logging road, exactly as he'd hoped. Tactical discipline collapsed as individual groups raced to be the first to engage, creating gaps in their formation and eliminating their numerical advantage. The first team to reach the logging road consisted of 3 men from the local chapter: Ray Peters, Carl Dixon's neighbor, and a kid who couldn't be more than 19. They approached the road cautiously, weapons ready, unaware they were walking into a prepared ambush site. Marcus had no desire to kill these men, but he needed them neutralized. He triggered a flash bang device hidden in the roadside brush, then followed up with precise shots that sent them scrambling for cover behind inadequate trees. "We're pinned down! Need backup! He's got the road covered!" More teams rushed to their aid, abandoning their search patterns to reinforce what they thought was a decisive engagement. Within minutes, 25 armed men were clustered along a quarter-mile stretch of logging road, presenting Marcus with exactly the target he'd been engineering. He keyed his radio again. "Tommy, you listening?" "I'm listening. You federal piece of—" "Look at your tactical situation. 25 men bunched up on a single road. No cover, no coordination. I've got overlapping fields of fire from elevated positions they can't even see." Silence on the radio as Tommy processed this information. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "Your men are going to drop their weapons and surrender. Federal agents are already surrounding your warehouse, and tactical teams are inbound to this location. You've got one chance to end this without bloodshed." Tommy's response was a roar of rage. "Kill him! All teams, concentrate fire on his position." The forest erupted in gunfire as 30-plus weapons opened up simultaneously. Trees splintered, rocks sparked, and the air filled with the whine of ricochets. But Marcus was already gone, moving to his final fallback position while his enemies wasted ammunition on empty ground. The tactical situation was developing exactly as he'd planned. The enemy was confused, scattered, and increasingly desperate. Soon, they'd make the fatal mistake that would allow federal authorities to end this with overwhelming force. Marcus checked his watch. Federal tactical teams would arrive in 90 minutes. All he had to do was stay alive that long while keeping 37 armed extremists contained in the kill zone he'd created. The real fight was just beginning. Marcus reached his final defensive position as the sound of helicopters echoed across the valley. Federal tactical teams were arriving exactly on schedule, but Tommy's men were too committed to their assault to notice the changing tactical situation. "All teams, push forward," Tommy's voice crackled over the radio, desperation bleeding through his attempted authority. "He's running out of tricks. We got him cornered." But Marcus wasn't cornered. He was exactly where he wanted to be. His final position commanded the entire logging road area where the extremists had clustered, while offering multiple escape routes should the situation deteriorate further. More importantly, it placed him between the armed groups and the town of Millbrook, ensuring any federal intervention would occur in the forest rather than near civilian populations. Marcus keyed his radio one final time. "Tommy, this is your last warning. Federal tactical teams are deploying around your position. Surrender now or face the consequences." "Federal teams?" Ray Peters's voice broke through the static, high with panic. "Tommy, he's telling the truth. I can hear helicopters." "It's a bluff," Tommy screamed back. "Keep moving. We finish this now." But the sound of rotors was unmistakable, growing louder by the minute. Several of the local men began to waver, looking skyward with growing alarm. "Tommy!" Carl Dixon's voice came through clearly. "My daughter gets out of school in 4 hours. I ain't dying in these woods for your crusade." "You already made your choice, Carl." "We all did." "No, you made it for us." Ray Peters joined the rebellion. "This was supposed to be about protecting our community, not starting a war with federal agents." Marcus watched through his scope as the assault force began to fracture. Half the men were still pushing forward, driven by ideology or momentum, while others hesitated or actively retreated. The cohesion Tommy had built was collapsing under pressure. During a field 3 miles away, at the warehouse command post, Frank Miller heard the approaching helicopters and made his decision. He walked outside with his hands raised, cell phone in one hand, white handkerchief in the other. "This is Frank Miller," he shouted toward the sky. "I'm surrendering. I have information about the armed group in the forest." 2 FBI helicopters circled the warehouse, while tactical vehicles approached from multiple directions. Frank had never been so grateful to see federal agents in his life. Agent Chen's voice came through a bullhorn. "Mr. Miller, remain in position with your hands visible. We're securing the area." Within minutes, Frank found himself in the back of an FBI command vehicle, spilling everything he knew about Tommy's operation, the financial networks, and the current tactical situation in the forest. 37 armed individuals, Agent Chen confirmed. From multiple states? At least that many. Tommy called everyone. Militias, chapters from Alabama and Tennessee, independent operators. They've got military weapons, tactical gear, the works. Agent Chen studied satellite imagery on her laptop. And Mr. Johnson is somewhere in this forest area, engaging this force alone? He lured them in deliberately, said something about controlling where the confrontation happened, keeping it away from town. Frank's voice shook. "Agent Chen, some of those men are looking for a fight with federal agents. They think this is the start of some kind of revolution. We're aware of the tactical situation, Mr. Miller. Right now, we need you to help us identify individuals so we can determine threat levels and negotiate surrenders." Back in the forest, The situation was reaching its critical point. Marcus could see federal tactical teams moving into position on the ridges surrounding the logging road area. Professional soldiers with advanced equipment, night vision, and overwhelming firepower advantage. The extremists were now trapped in a tactical box with no good options. Some realized this and were trying to surrender. Others, driven by ideology or desperation, prepared to fight federal agents. Tommy's voice cut through the radio chatter, filled with the fervor of a true believer. "This is it. This is what we've been preparing for. The federal government has finally shown its true face." "Tommy, shut up!" Ray Peters was openly panicking now. "They got us surrounded. We got families to think about. Your families will thank you for taking a stand, for showing them what real Americans do when tyranny comes to their door." Marcus made a tactical decision. Tommy was the key. Remove his leadership, and the remaining men would likely surrender rather than face federal tactical teams in a hopeless fight. He adjusted his rifle scope, acquiring a clear sight picture of Tommy's position. Not a killing shot, a precise wound that would incapacitate without causing death. Marcus had the skills for such precision, even at this range. But before he could fire, Tommy made the decision for him. "Johnson!" Tommy's voice carried across the forest without radio assistance. "You hear me out there? You want to end this? Come face me like a man. Single combat. Winner takes all." The forest went quiet, except for the distant sound of helicopters. Even the federal teams seemed to pause, waiting to see how this would play out. Marcus considered the offer. It was tactically unnecessary. Federal agents would have the situation contained within minutes, but it might prevent bloodshed, might give the wavering extremists a face-saving way to surrender. "What are the terms?" Marcus called back. "You and me, hand to hand, no weapons. If you win, my men surrender. If I win, we all walk away." "Tommy, no!" Ray Peters' voice cracked. "This ain't some movie. Just surrender." But Tommy was beyond reason now, driven by desperation and the need to salvage something from the disaster his leadership had created. Marcus stood up from his concealed position, rifle slung across his back. "Federal agents, hold positions. I'm going to end this." Agent Chen's voice came through his earpiece. "Mr. Johnson, do not engage. We have the situation contained." "Agent Chen, 37 desperate men with military weapons are a major threat to your tactical teams. Let me end this without a firefight." Marcus walked down from his position, hands visible, moving toward the clearing where Tommy waited. Around them, armed men on both sides held their fire, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether this ended with handcuffs or body bags. Tommy emerged from cover, his face twisted with rage and something approaching madness. 20 years I've been waiting for this moment. 20 years of watching our country get destroyed by people like you. It doesn't have to end this way, Tommy. Your men have families. They don't need to die for your cause." "My cause?" Tommy laughed bitterly. "My cause is the same cause my grandfather fought for. Keeping our communities safe from outsiders who want to change everything we built." They circled each other in the clearing, two men representing everything the other despised. Around them, weapons remained trained, but fingers stayed off triggers. "Last chance," Marcus said quietly. "Call it off. Let your men go home to their families." Tommy's answer was a wild charge, fists swinging with desperate fury. But desperation was no match for 20 years of military training. Marcus sidestepped, caught Tommy's arm, and drove him to the ground with clinical efficiency. It was over in seconds. Tommy lay unconscious in the dirt, while his followers stared in stunned silence. "It's finished," Marcus announced to the forest. "Drop your weapons and surrender. No one else has to get hurt." One by one, rifles hit the ground as men raised their hands. The great assault had ended not with a climactic battle, but with the simple reality that they'd been outmatched from the beginning. Federal agents moved in to secure the scene, and Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe. The immediate aftermath unfolded with the efficiency of a well-orchestrated federal operation. Marcus watched from the edge of the clearing as 37 men were processed, searched, and loaded into transport vehicles. Some went quietly, shoulders slumped in defeat. Others maintained defiant postures even in handcuffs, still believing their cause justified the violence they'd attempted. Agent Chen approached Marcus as the last of the prisoners was secured. "Mr. Johnson, we need a full debrief. What you've accomplished here, single-handedly dismantling a regional domestic terror network, it's unprecedented." "I didn't do it single-handedly," Marcus replied, watching Tommy Briggs being helped into a medical vehicle. "They did most of the work themselves. I just gave them enough rope. The evidence you provided is extraordinary. Financial records, communications, weapons caches, coordination between multiple hate groups across 4 states. The Justice Department is calling this the most significant domestic terrorism prosecution in the Southeast in 2 decades. Marcus nodded, but his attention was elsewhere. Deputy Jake Morrison was making his way through the federal agents, his young face serious with purpose. "Mr. Johnson," Morrison extended his hand, "I owe you an apology. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to act on it. You tried to help. That's more than most people would do. It wasn't enough. I let fear of local politics override my duty to protect innocent people." Morrison's voice carried genuine remorse. "Tommy and his group have been intimidating folks for years. I always told myself it was just talk, just bluster. Now you know better." "Yes, sir. And I promise you, nothing like this will happen in Millbrook again." "Not on my watch." Agent Chen interrupted their conversation. "Mr. Johnson, there's something else we need to discuss. The scope of this conspiracy extends far beyond what happened here today." She led him to the FBI command vehicle, where laptops displayed organizational charts and communication networks that spanned multiple states. "Using the intelligence you gathered, we've identified cells in Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and South Carolina. All connected, all coordinating activities. Coordinated how? Funding, weapons transfers, shared training facilities, even personnel exchanges. What you uncovered here was part of a much larger network." Agent Chen's expression was grim. "Mr. Johnson, these people had plans. Not just local intimidation. They were preparing for what they called regional actions against minority communities, Jewish targets, and federal facilities." Marcus studied the charts, recognizing some names from documents he'd photographed in Tommy's trailer. Timeline? Based on their communications, they were planning to escalate activities over the next 6 months. Starting with what happened to you, then expanding to systematic intimidation campaigns across multiple counties. But now their entire network is compromised. Arrests are being coordinated across 4 states as we speak. By tonight, we'll have rolled up the largest domestic terror conspiracy in the region's history. The magnitude of what had been prevented was staggering. Marcus thought about all the families who would never know how close they'd come to being targeted. All the communities that would remain safe because one night of violence had been answered with systematic justice. Meanwhile, in the Millbrook town square, Betty Hawthorne stood among a small crowd of residents who'd gathered to watch the federal operation unfold. News trucks were arriving from Atlanta and Birmingham, drawn by reports of a major domestic terrorism arrest. "Betty, did you know?" asked Martha Phillips, who ran the flower shop. "About Tommy and his group?" Betty considered her answer carefully. She'd suspected plenty but proven nothing until she'd seen that meeting at the barn. "I knew Tommy was full of hate. Didn't know how far he'd go with it. Thank God for that Johnson man. Standing up to them when the rest of us were too scared. Takes courage to do what's right when you're outnumbered, Betty agreed. Question is, what do we do now? How do we make sure our town doesn't breed this kind of poison again? The question hung in the air as they watched federal agents processing evidence and taking statements. Millbrook would survive this day, but healing from it would take much longer. Quantenters back at the command post, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Rose's voice was tight with worry as she spoke from her car. Marcus, I'm an hour outside Millbrook. I've been driving since I saw the news reports. Are you safe? I'm safe, Rose. It's over. Over? Marcus, the news is saying you took on an army of white supremacists single-handedly. That doesn't sound over. That sounds like something that's going to follow you for the rest of your life. Marcus hadn't considered that aspect. The media attention, the scrutiny, the way this would define him going forward. He'd wanted quiet, peaceful civilian life. Instead, he'd become the center of a national news story about domestic terrorism and vigilante justice. Rose, I need you to turn around. Go back to Atlanta. Absolutely not. You're my brother, and you just went through something traumatic. I'm not leaving you alone. It's not safe yet. There could be other cells, other groups that want revenge. Then we'll deal with that together. You've been handling everything alone for too long. Agent Chen approached with news that complicated matters further. Mr. Johnson, we've received credible intelligence about potential retaliation. These groups have a culture of vengeance, and what you did today, dismantling their entire regional network, that's going to generate a response. What kind of response? Unknown actors, possibly from outside the immediate area. People who see you as a federal collaborator who destroyed their movement. Agent Chen's expression was serious. We're recommending immediate relocation and protective custody. Marcus felt his carefully planned peaceful retirement slipping away. For how long? Indefinite. These groups have long memories and access to resources we're still mapping. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought to defend his right to live peacefully in Millbrook, and now his victory meant he couldn't safely live there at all. Deputy Morrison overheard the conversation and stepped forward. Agent Chen, with respect, Mr. Johnson has a right to stay in his community if he chooses. And if he stays, he'll have the full protection of local law enforcement. Deputy Morrison, local law enforcement was part of the problem until today. Not anymore. Morrison's young face was set with determination. I've already spoken with the sheriff. We're requesting state assistance to investigate every deputy, every officer, every local official. Anyone who enabled this conspiracy is going to face justice. Marcus appreciated the gesture, but he understood the reality. Rural law enforcement couldn't protect him from a determined regional conspiracy, and federal protection meant living as a prisoner of his own success. His phone rang again. Rose, calling from the town limits. Marcus, I can see the roadblocks. I'm coming in whether you like it or not. Rose? No arguments. We're family. Family sticks together. As Marcus ended the call, he realized the real climax wasn't the firefight in the forest. It was this moment, when he had to decide what kind of life he wanted to build from the ashes of his confrontation with hate. The choices he made in the next few hours would determine whether he'd won anything meaningful or simply traded one kind of isolation for another. The confrontation Marcus had been dreading came at sunset, when the federal agents were packing up their equipment and the media circus was finally winding down. A lone pickup truck approached the roadblock at the edge of town, moving slowly but deliberately toward the command post where Marcus stood with Agent Chen. Deputy Morrison radioed from the checkpoint. Single occupant, older white male, appears unarmed but agitated. Says he needs to speak with Marcus Johnson. Let him through, Marcus said, recognizing something in the description that made his instincts flare. The truck stopped 50 yards away, and a man in his 70s climbed out. He was tall, weathered, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. But it was his eyes that told Marcus everything. The same cold hatred he'd seen in Tommy Briggs, but tempered by decades and sharpened by intelligence. "You Johnson?" the man called out. "I am. Name's William Briggs, Tommy's grandfather." The old man walked closer, his hands visible but his posture radiating menace. "I taught that boy everything he knew about protecting our people." "Seems like I didn't teach him enough." Agent Chen stepped forward. "Sir, this is a federal crime scene. You need to—" "Ma'am, with respect, this is between me and the man who destroyed my family." William's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent his life being obeyed. "I'm not armed. I'm not threatening anyone. I just want to talk." Marcus waved Agent Chen back. "Let him say his piece." William studied Marcus with the calculating gaze of a predator. "You know, I fought in Vietnam. 3 tours. Saw plenty of soldiers who thought they were hot stuff because they could handle themselves in a firefight. This isn't about military service. No, it's about understanding your place in the world." William's voice hardened. "Tommy made mistakes. I'll grant you that. Got emotional. Got sloppy. But his heart was in the right place. His heart was full of hate. His heart was full of love. Love for his community, his heritage, his people." William stepped closer. "You can't understand that, can you? What it means to watch everything your family built get torn down by outsiders?" Marcus felt the familiar calm that preceded violence. "I understand what it means to fight for something worth protecting." "Do you?" "Because from where I stand, you just helped the federal government destroy a group of men who were trying to preserve their way of life. Their way of life included burning crosses and beating people unconscious." William's laugh was bitter. "You think this started with Tommy? You think this is about one group in one small town? Boy, you have no idea what you've unleashed." Agent Chen was moving closer, hand near her weapon, but Marcus gestured for her to stay back. This conversation needed to happen. "What are you really here to say, Mr. Briggs?" "I'm here to tell you that Tommy was just one branch on a very old tree. Cut off one branch, 2 more grow back. You think arresting 37 men is going to change anything?" William's eyes glittered with something approaching satisfaction. "All you've done is prove that we were right to prepare for war. There is no war. There's just a handful of bitter old men who can't accept that the world has moved on." "Has it?" William pulled out his cell phone, showing Marcus a series of text messages. 43 different cells across 7 states, all asking how they can help Tommy's family. All wanting to know who was responsible for exposing their operation. Marcus read the messages, recognizing the language of coordinated resistance. This wasn't just idle threats. It was the mobilization of a network far larger than anything they'd uncovered today. "You see, Mr. Johnson, Tommy was emotional. I'm not. Tommy acted locally. I think regionally. Tommy got caught because he let anger cloud his judgment." William's smile was cold and calculating. "I've been planning for 50 years. Agent Chen finally intervened. "Mr. Briggs, you're describing conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. I strongly advise." "I'm describing the inevitable response to federal overreach." William cut her off. "You think you won something here today? You've just painted a target on every federal agent, every collaborator, every race traitor who helped you." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. Tommy hadn't been the real leader. He'd been the visible figurehead, while his grandfather pulled strings from the shadows. The old man had sacrificed his grandson and the entire local operation to test federal response capabilities and identify weaknesses. "You set Tommy up," Marcus realized. You let him get exposed so you could see how we'd respond. Tommy was always expendable. He served his purpose. William's admission was delivered without emotion. Now I know exactly what you're capable of, exactly how the federal response works, exactly what mistakes to avoid next time. There won't be a next time. Oh, there will be. Because you made one critical error, Mr. Johnson. William's voice dropped to a whisper. You assumed this was about territory, about keeping outsiders away from one small town. But this was never about Millbrook. What was it about? Recruitment, radicalization, proof that the federal government will use overwhelming force against white Americans who dare to organize. William gestured toward the federal vehicles, the helicopters, the massive law enforcement response. Do you have any idea how this looks to sympathizers across the region? How many fence-sitters you just pushed into our camp? The old man was right, and Marcus knew it. The dramatic federal response, while necessary, would be spun as government tyranny by every extremist group in the Southeast. The propaganda value was immense. But more than that, William continued, you've given me something even more valuable. You've given me you. What do you mean? Marcus Johnson, the federal collaborator who destroyed a patriot organization and killed white men who were defending their community. William's smile was triumphant. You're going to be our poster child, Mr. Johnson. The face of federal oppression. Every recruitment video, every propaganda piece, every call to arms will feature your story. Agent Chen stepped forward. Mr. Briggs, you're under arrest for conspiracy to… On what evidence? Everything I've said is protected speech. William raised his hands in mock surrender. I haven't threatened anyone, haven't broken any laws. I'm just a grieving grandfather sharing his perspective on current events. Marcus realized the trap they'd walked into. William Briggs wasn't just a regional organizer. He was a strategist who'd turned their victory into a recruitment tool for his cause. Every arrest today would generate sympathy. Every federal agent involved would become a target. Every tactical success would be reframed as government oppression. You're going to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, William said to Marcus. Not because of any specific threat, but because you've become a symbol. And symbols have a way of attracting attention from people who take their ideology very seriously. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. Based on 50 years of watching how these things develop. William turned toward his truck. Enjoy your federal protection, Mr. Johnson. You're going to need it. As the old man drove away, Marcus felt the weight of incomplete victory settling on his shoulders. They'd won the battle, but potentially lost the war. Tommy's arrest would generate martyrs. The federal response would generate recruits. And somewhere in the shadows, more intelligent and patient enemies were already adapting their strategies. Agent Chen's phone buzzed with incoming reports. Mr. Johnson, we're getting chatter from monitored channels. Multiple groups discussing Johnson as a priority target. This is escalating beyond anything we anticipated. Marcus looked toward town, where Rose was waiting for him at Betty Hawthorne's diner. His sister had driven 8 hours to be with him, expecting to find her brother safe and victorious. Instead, she'd find him trapped in a war that had only just begun. The real question wasn't whether he'd won or lost today. It was whether the price of victory was worth paying. Conclusion: 6 months later, Marcus stood on the rebuilt porch of his farmhouse, watching his nephew and niece chase fireflies across the yard while Rose prepared dinner in the kitchen behind him. The house looked different now. Reinforced windows, improved security systems, and clear sight lines in all directions. But it was still home. Uncle Marcus, look! 8-year-old Jamal held up a mason jar with 3 fireflies blinking inside. I caught the fast ones. That's great, buddy. Just remember to let them go before bedtime. Why? Because they belong outside, with their families. Rose appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Dinner's ready. And before you ask, yes, I made enough for Betty when she gets here. Marcus smiled. Betty Hawthorne had become a regular visitor, bringing casseroles and town gossip in equal measure. She'd also become an unofficial liaison between Marcus and the community, helping bridge the gap that his confrontation with the extremists had created. Any word from Agent Chen today? Rose asked. Actually, yes. Good news for once. Marcus pulled out his phone. William Briggs was arrested this morning. Turns out his 50 years of planning weren't as sophisticated as he thought. Rose's eyes widened. What happened? The old man made the same mistake every extremist makes. He underestimated federal intelligence capabilities. While he was busy trying to recruit new members and plan retaliation, the FBI was monitoring every communication, every financial transaction, every meeting. Marcus scrolled through Agent Chen's messages. They've rolled up his entire network. 43 cells across 7 states, just like he bragged about. How? The evidence I provided led them to financial networks that connected everything. Bank records, weapons purchases, communication patterns. Once they had the thread, they unraveled the whole sweater. Marcus felt satisfaction settle in his chest. Turns out, William's grand strategy was actually just a poorly secured conspiracy that federal investigators dismantled in 6 months. Betty Hawthorne's car pulled into the driveway, her headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. She emerged with her usual energy, carrying a covered dish and practically bouncing with excitement. Y'all heard the news? That awful old man got arrested. FBI agents swarmed his place this morning. Betty climbed the porch steps with more spring than usual. Sheriff Morrison said they found enough evidence to charge him with sedition. We just heard, Rose said. Betty, you look positively gleeful. Honey, that man's been poisoning this county for 50 years. His daddy was in the Klan, his son was in the Klan, and he raised Tommy to carry on the family tradition. Seeing him finally face justice, Betty grinned. It's like Christmas morning. They gathered around the kitchen table for dinner, and the conversation naturally turned to the morning's arrests. Betty had details from her network of church ladies and town gossips. Turns out he wasn't half as smart as he thought, she said, passing the cornbread. Sheriff Morrison said the FBI was reading his emails before he even sent them. All that talk about being patient and strategic? He was using the same encrypted messaging app that every other extremist group uses. Might as well have posted his plans on Facebook. Marcus nodded. Agent Chen told me something interesting. William thought the federal response to Tommy's group would generate sympathy and recruits. Instead, it had the opposite effect. How so? Rose asked. Turns out, most people don't want to join organizations that get completely destroyed by law enforcement. When potential recruits saw Tommy's crew get arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to federal prison, they decided extremism wasn't worth the risk. Marcus smiled. William's grand recruitment strategy actually drove people away from his cause. Betty laughed. Serves him right. That man always thought he was the smartest person in any room. Never occurred to him that federal agents might be a little smarter than small-town extremists. After dinner, Marcus and Rose sat on the porch while the children played inside. The evening was peaceful, but Rose still seemed troubled. What's bothering you? Marcus asked. I keep thinking about what that old man said, about you becoming a symbol, about attracting attention from extremists across the region. Rose hugged her knees. Were you worried he was right? For a while, yes. The first few months, I wondered if I'd made things worse. Marcus gestured toward the town lights in the distance. But Agent Chen showed me something today that changed my perspective. What? Crime statistics. Not just for Millbrook, but for the entire region. Hate crimes are down 60% since the arrests. Extremist recruitment is at historic lows. Even graffiti and vandalism targeting minorities has dropped dramatically. Marcus's voice carried quiet satisfaction. Turns out, when you dismantle the leadership and prove that actions have consequences, most cowards decide to find other hobbies. And the true believers? There are always true believers. But without organization, without leadership, without the financial networks that William spent 50 years building, they're just angry individuals shouting into the void instead of coordinated groups planning attacks. Betty emerged from the kitchen, having finished cleaning up. "I should head home, but I wanted to tell you something first, Marcus." "What's that?" "My granddaughter starts college next month. Full scholarship to Georgia Tech. Engineering program." Betty's voice was thick with emotion. "She told me something yesterday that made me think of you." "What did she say?" "She said she never thought she could pursue engineering because it wasn't for girls like her. But seeing what you did, how you refused to be intimidated, how you fought back against people who said you didn't belong, it gave her courage to apply for programs she'd never considered before." Betty wiped her eyes. "That's what real victory looks like, Marcus. Not just stopping bad people, but inspiring good people to be braver than they thought possible." After Betty left, Marcus sat alone on his porch, processing the day's revelations. William Briggs had been wrong about everything. His strategic brilliance, his network's security, his understanding of how ordinary people would respond to extremist violence. The old man's threats had been empty bluster from someone whose time had passed. His phone buzzed with a final message from Agent Chen. Network completely dismantled. 127 arrests across 7 states. Financial assets seized. William Briggs looking at life in federal prison. Threat level to you downgraded to minimal. "Well done, Mr. Johnson." Marcus smiled and powered off the phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would be normal challenges. Home repairs, family visits, community involvement. The existential threat that had hung over Millbrook for decades was finally gone. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley. The same sound that had welcomed Marcus to Millbrook 8 months ago. But everything else had changed. The town had been tested and emerged stronger. The community had faced its demons and chosen a better path. And Marcus had found something he'd never expected to find in civilian life: purpose, family, and genuine peace. The fireflies his nephew had caught earlier blinked in their jar on the porch rail, and Marcus quietly opened the lid, watching them drift away into the darkness to rejoin their families. Some things belonged outside, in the light, where everyone could see them. And some old lies finally died when exposed to the truth. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.